You may be familiar with the Charnley-Norwood House in Ocean Springs, but just who are these families and how are they associated with the property? The property bears the name of the family that established it, along with the family that rebuilt it after a devastating fire. James Charnley was born in Philadelphia in 1844 and moved with his family to New Haven, Connecticut, where his father constructed an octagonal house for the family. This may have been James' first introduction to forward-thinking design. After graduating from Yale in 1865, he moved to Chicago, where he would become a well-known name in that city's lumber trade. In 1871, he married Helen Douglas, a native of Chicago, 10 years his junior. That same year was the disastrous Great Chicago Fire, which created further opportunities for James' work in the lumber trade, which he sourced from the northern Midwest. The Charnleys had two daughters, Helen and Elizabeth, but only their son Douglas would live into adulthood. Little is known about the Charnley social life, and they appear to have kept to themselves. They most notably traveled to the American South during the cold, snowy Chicago winters, meeting by happenstance a friend from Chicago, architect Louis Sullivan, while they were in New Orleans. Together, Sullivan and the Charnleys traveled to the Mississippi Gulf Coast, where shortly the idea for a house would come to bear after Sullivan and the Charnleys purchased adjacent parcels of land. Completed in early 1891, the Charnleys owned their home until 1896, when they sold it to Fred and Elizabeth Norwood, also of Chicago. Fred Norwood was born in northern Massachusetts in 1842, and by 1860 he had moved to Minnesota. He served in the Civil War and was wounded at the Battle of Mobile. After the war, he moved to Chicago, where he married Elizabeth Wynne in 1868. Fred Norwood was in the wholesale boot and shoe business, but in 1881 he switched to lumber, with which he had much success. In 1896, with their two daughters grown, Fred retired, and he and Elizabeth looked for a vacation retreat. It is not known how the Norwoods came to purchase the house, but surely James and Fred would have known one another through business circles, and this may have been how the sale transpired. The Norwoods owned the house for about 9 months when it mysteriously burned to the ground on the night of February 18, 1897, with Elizabeth Norwood and their two daughters in the home at the time, while Fred Norwood was in Chicago. Louis Sullivan, who still lived next door at the time, encouraged the Norwoods to rebuild the design, but also to improve upon it based upon his most up-to-date architectural philosophy. And this is the house that stands today.